Good morning. Anybody else running in here? Welcome to Star King UU Fellowship. My name is Llewellyn Skinner. I'm a member of the board, and it's my pleasure to be with you here today. Our summer services theme is Cultivating Love, and they've all been lay-led. Yeah, they have. Even the speakers have been led in some form. Yes. Our minister, the Reverend Linda Barnes, will be back in the pulpit on the 7th of September. We're so pleased to have Josh Duclos here today discussing democracy. When I saw this first write-up, I thought, is he going to tell us democracy is not good? But I don't think that's the case. So we're glad to have him here. We would like to offer special thanks to Jonathan on the camera back there. And he has been here every Sunday supplying that live feed to somewhere, right? That ends up being a YouTube. And he's managed to do it and never asked for help, I don't think, because I couldn't help. So we're glad that he's here as well. It's customary for us to light a chalice. It's a symbol of us coming together, the light of love, the light of wisdom and knowledge. So I would like to do that. Our chalice lighting words are like this. We light this chalice, remembering and honoring our tradition and celebrating the rich diversity of traditions among us. As we search for justice, meaning, and purpose, may we remember that justice, meaning, and purpose live first in deeply listening to one another. And I'm going to make this is a thing that lights things. Check this, pretty amazing. Okay. So please join me in welcoming Josh Duclos.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks very much to everyone who invited me here and helped make this happen. I'm thrilled to be here. There's a lot that I'd like to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. Was I planning to tell you that democracy is not a good thing? No, but nor am I planning to tell you that it is a good thing. I'm going to present arguments. You are intelligent, autonomous citizens of a democratic republic, and you can make of the arguments what you will. I think one of the great tragedies of contemporary political discourse is people find themselves completely unfamiliar with any argument that they don't already agree with. So I'm trained as a philosopher. I do work in moral and political philosophy, and so what I want to do is share with you the arguments primarily for democracy, but I will try and touch on why more than a few philosophers, historic and contemporary, have thought it was a terrible idea. All right, why democracy? Here we go. I'm assuming this is an image that's familiar. This was, gosh, January 6th, right? January 6th, 2021. Now, why am I sharing this image? Why am I starting a presentation about democracy and the philosophy of democracy with this? Something that's intriguing about this image is that both the people storming the Capitol and trying to break in and disrupt the certification of an election and the people defending the Capitol both claimed that they were doing it in the name of democracy. Adamant that they were doing it in the name of democracy. I added this slide just the other day because it popped up. Poll about Americans thinking that American democracy is in danger. Right now, 57%, regardless of political affiliation, think that democracy is in danger. And if you read the rest of the article, the implication is this is a bad thing. Right now, you have many more people on the left or who affiliate with Democrats saying democracy is in danger. If I had thrown up almost an identical chart from a year ago, it would have looked different. You would have had fewer people who associate with the left or Democrats saying democracy was in danger, saying everything was fine, and you would have had more Republicans and conservatives. Now, what's the point of this? The point of this for me is that democracy is this unambiguous, unquestioned good in American society. And maybe that's a really good thing, that it's just too obvious to even argue about. Whether you were for Harris, whether you were for Trump, right, left, conservative, progressive, whatever, that seems to be the one thing everybody agrees on, is that democracy is good. So as a philosopher, it's sometimes hard to explain what it is I do or what my field is. Here's a very quick explanation. I think philosophers are trained to find the things that almost everybody takes as obvious or given or axiomatic and go, huh, that's weird, why? So, why democracy? That's the title of the talk. I have no doubt this is a very, very educated, informed audience, but let me just run through a few terms so that we're all on the same page for the rest of the presentation. Literally, what does democracy mean? What's the etymology? Two Greek words, demos and kratos, literally would translate to people power. Somewhat more cynically, some people have referred to it as mob rule. Depends if you like democracy or not. Lincoln's formulation, rule of the people, by the people, for the people, it's the by the people part that actually is relevant to democracy. Rule of the people, well, monarchs rule the people, for the people, anyone can become. Stalin, no doubt, thought he was ruling for the people. It's the by the people part that is significant to democracy. And then very basically, two fundamental forms of democracy: direct democracy. We still have these in some small New England towns with the town meetings where you get together and you vote on every policy and every budget item, that laws and policies are chosen directly by the electorate, or representative democracy, which is what we have in the American Democratic Republic, where individual citizens democratically choose representatives who then go and democratically choose laws and policies for the citizenry. Okay, so can anyone possibly object to democracy, right? Even in hyper-divided America, everyone agrees on democracy, and the answer is yes. Yes, yes, yes. People can object to democracy. Not only can they, but they have. Confucius, Plato, Thomas Hobbes, Voltaire. I'm just cherry-picking some names that I thought people would be more familiar with. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. And it's not just the deceased old philosophers. A guy named Jason Brennan. Gosh, where is he now? I think he's at the University of Notre Dame. I might be wrong about that. He's a, whether you like him or not, an important, influential, contemporary political philosopher. He's not just some crank on YouTube. And he wrote a book 8 or 9 years ago called The Case Against Democracy. So this is a live debate. So whatever, especially for those who value democracy, who like it, it actually isn't something that's safe to treat it as a settled issue. Everyone agrees that democracy is valuable. Everyone agrees we should remain a democratic republic. It turns out, actually, a lot of people don't. All right, since I mentioned Plato, and Plato got his views from Socrates, I want to quickly give the main arguments that philosophers have made against a democratic system. Let's start with Socrates. Why did Socrates oppose democracy? And he really did. He hated democracy. His student Plato partly hated it because democratic Athens executed his teacher, democratically, by the way. So Plato thought maybe this wasn't the best way to go. But Socrates, the analogy that Socrates made was to a ship. If you were going to go on a long ocean voyage, a dangerous ocean voyage, and there has to be a captain, how should you figure out who's going to be the captain of the ship? Should you take a vote? Get everyone down to the Agora in Athens and, get a show of hands on who should captain the ship over to Crete or wherever they're sailing? And Socrates said, no, that'd be madness. We would never do that. For us, next time you're heading to Logan Airport, you're going to get on a plane. Presumably, you don't want that pilot to have been chosen by people in the Sky Lounge, who were campaigning and then did a quick show of hands, but who should be the pilot? Socrates' point was that captaining the ship of state is vastly more complicated and greatly more important than just captaining a good old sailing vessel. And if we wouldn't leave it up to democratic decision-making to figure out who should be the captain of the ship, why should we ever do that with the ship of state? Getting into more contemporary arguments, this is what philosophers who think there's a real problem with democracy would say. They'd say most of us are ignorant about most things, Can't speak for anyone else, that's true of me. I am vastly ignorant about most things in the universe. Turns out, psychologists have quite definitively proven we all have strong cognitive biases, and we're actually bad at reasoning. We're much worse at reasoning than we think we are. Especially those of us who are clever or intelligent or successful in certain fields. When it comes to things that we feel emotional or passionate about, we are very, very bad at reasoning. We're not all good people, or we're not always good people. So even if you think democracy or giving people power, demos and kratos, giving people decision-making power, we certainly don't mean the vicious, the nasty, the sociopathic, so we might worry about them. And the two main alternatives people have proposed historically and in current times are what they call an epistocracy or the aristocracy. An epistocracy would be ruled by the most knowledgeable. So who gets to fly the plane? Whoever's most knowledgeable about flying planes. Who gets to captain the ship? Whoever knows the most about seamanship. So who should rule or who should govern? Presumably it would be whoever has the right knowledge, the right information about running a town or a state or a government or an agency or something like that. Aristocracy has an unfavorable connotation. We tend to use the word today to mean people who just think they're better by birth, or they belong to exclusive clubs or something like that. The word itself just means rule by the best. Aristos or Ariston, the best people. So rule by the best people, and when the Greeks said this, they meant the most virtuous. So I mean, Abraham Lincoln is usually the example people use in American history, that there was something not perfect, but magnificently virtuous and special, that he was good in a really profound way. All right, so that's the case against democracy. So getting back to my title, why democracy? If we're not going to give in to these arguments, if the impulse is, hold on, that might all be true, but there's something valuable here, what are the arguments for it? Oh, I forgot, this is my favorite example. An example that opponents of democracy like to use. About 15 years ago, the British taxpayers funded a new Arctic exploration ship. And because they're good Democrats, they thought, why are we going to have a bunch of men in a smoky back room decide what to call it? We're going to turn it over to the people. The people, this is the people's ship. They're going to decide. Wisdom of crowds. Let's see what they come up with. Maybe it'll be the Shakespeare, the Shackleton, the Churchill, the Mary Wollstonecraft. Nope, they voted for Bodie McBoatface. So hundreds of millions of pounds in this great, and that's what the people voted for. So the British government was a little jammed up. I mean, do we go with democracy and name it Bodie McBoatface? And the answer is no. They said that's ridiculous and people are stupid and we're not doing that. So they named it the Sir David Attenborough, a great British naturalist filmmaker. But one of the tiny, I don't know if it's a dinghy or rowboat, or I don't remember.
It's an underwater drone.
Oh, the drone. Okay, they named that the Bodie McBoat. So they made a gesture to democracy, but they said, look, we're just not doing that. Okay, I'm going to now give arguments for the value of democracy. Value breaks down into two forms, intrinsic and instrumental. The reason I have this image of a book from political philosopher Adam Swift is I do have a couple quotes and citations, and I just think it's a good idea to give a reference for that. If anyone wants to fact check me on anything I'm saying, there it is. You can look up the 3rd edition of Adam Swift's Political Philosophy. Instrumental value. When we value something instrumentally, it's because of the outcomes it's likely to produce, not because the thing itself matters to us. Money is the paradigmatic example. Most of us, most normal, healthy people understand that money is only good as a means to something else. You'd have to imagine some Scrooge McDuck scenario of someone who just accumulates money for its own sake and bathes in it and builds a money bin, but it's funny as a cartoon because it's a kind of pathology. Money is an instrumental good. So some things have value because of what they get us. Other things seem to have value in and of themselves. They're valued for their own sake, not because of any outcome it produces. And there's lots of things like this. I happen to think truth itself has an intrinsic value. Yeah. Might also have an instrumental value, but I just think truth is valuable. Friendship is something. I mean, if you're using your friends just to get something else, I'd question whether it's a real friendship. The friendship itself should be the end. Art, beauty, again, many people, though not all, would agree, has intrinsic value. Why do you want that beautiful painting on your wall? Just because it's a beautiful painting. Okay, so democracy, I think, has both instrumental and intrinsic value, and I'm going to quickly, it's going to be a lot of information. I decided to go for breadth rather than depth there, so if you find yourself thinking, hold on, you're moving rather quickly, or there's more to say, yes, you're absolutely right. I'll try to go through quickly though, and then we can get into Q&A or discussion. So 3 types of intrinsic value and 3 types of instrumental value that are all arguments used in favor of democracy. The first one, maybe the most powerful intrinsic argument, is that democracy is freedom. And freedom is just intrinsically good. Why do we want to be free? We just want to be free. Freedom is its own reward, it's its own end. The argument here with democracy is that freedom should really be understood as autonomy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau put it this way: freedom is obedience to a law we give ourselves. Immanuel Kant, slightly later, adopted this idea of autonomy, which literally in Greek means self-law. If you're autonomous, you're a lawgiver to yourself. The only way to really be free is to see yourself as the authors of the laws that you are subject to. So if you agree with the claim that freedom is an intrinsic good, and you think that democracy is a way of exercising autonomy or being autonomous, then you would see democracy as something that just has intrinsic value. Oh, and for all these, by the way, I'm going to try to actually engage with the objection rather than pretend that these arguments don't have objections. So, freedom, right? Democracy is autonomy and it gives us freedom. Well, who could object to that? Well, people do point out that how does an outvoted minority really have democracy? Because in a democracy, many of us lose much of the time. It could be, you could have a supermajority, it could be 95% to 5, but that 5% is still an outvoted minority. So if you're an outvoted minority in a democracy and you're being forced to follow someone else's law, in what sense is democracy giving you autonomy and freedom? Here's the response to that objection. The response would be, yeah, that's true so far as it goes. If I vote against a certain policy or against a certain candidate and I lose, and then I'm following some law that I didn't actually approve, that I didn't give myself, yeah, in a sense I'm not fully autonomous. The response would be that democracy maximizes our chances for autonomy, that you have to look at every other system and say which one gives the best chance of giving people autonomy or respecting their autonomy. Furthermore, the response would say that by participating in the democratic process, you are exercising your autonomy, even when you're outvoted. And then when you're outvoted, you don't like it, you can write letters to the editor, and you can assemble, and you can protest, and you can back a rival candidate, and you can try and overturn a policy. So your autonomy is not trampled underfoot, it's not violated. But as with many of the arguments for democracy, proponents will admit, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's better than a lot of the other alternatives. That democracy still gives us a pretty good chance at autonomy. Second intrinsic argument. Self-realization. This one's a little peculiar, maybe doesn't hold as much weight today. It's an old argument. And the argument is this, that realizing our nature as human beings requires political participation. When Aristotle wrote about this, he talked about us as political animals. He did not mean that we are by nature drawn to being Democrats or Republicans or participating in national conventions or that we're reading Slate.com every day or something like that. What he really meant was that we're social animals, that our nature as human beings, as the kind of organic creatures that we are, only really comes into being in association with others. And particularly when we get together with others and have hard, serious conversations about the true, the good, and the beautiful, using our remarkable linguistic and rational capacities. So one of Aristotle's arguments about why human beings, to really fully be human beings, needed what he called political society, what we would just say society, why we needed to live together, is that someone who lives a completely isolated life will not become fully human because we have these capacities for the exchange of reasons and debate and linguistic discourse. So democracy, by forcing people to do that, or inviting people to do that, to get together and have these hard conversations about, well, I said the true, the good, and the beautiful. It might be, you know, taxes, roads, and you know, I don't know, healthcare. You know, things that are more mundane. But in doing that, we actually realize our human nature. Interestingly, idios, where we get our word idiot in Greek, means private. And this is what the Greeks would have thought that. Someone who doesn't engage in political society, someone who doesn't do, in some sense, what we're doing this morning, they're idiots. not necessarily like they're, not as a pejorative, but they're deeply private people who don't become fully human. Okay, and now maybe the most powerful argument, kind of the trump card that advocates of democracy like to throw down, is equality. Democracy is fair. It's just fair. Everybody counts for one. Nobody counts for more than one. As Adam Swift puts it, democracy is the law-making procedure that most respects the equal standing of citizens. And so when you get to that belief in the history of political thought, that everyone counts for one and no one counts for more than one, this is a system that does honor to that idea. There are objections to this. If equality, there's I'm forgetting his name right now, he's a political philosopher at Brown University, who's a big advocate of democracy, let me hasten to point out. He has said, careful about pushing too hard on the fairness part, because if fairness is all that matters, let's just flip a coin. It was in the hundreds of billions, the amount of money spent on the last presidential election, and it turns out it was either going to be Harris or it was going to be Trump. And we could have flipped a coin. 50-50, which is roughly what it came out to in the voting anyway. We could have saved a bunch of money, and a bunch of time, and a bunch of grief, and no one can claim it wasn't fair as long as we have a legitimate coin, and the coin wasn't loaded, it wasn't a double-headed nickel or something like that, right? Why not just flip a coin? So the point there is, you can't just say that the value is fairness. Another objection that advocates of democracy would make is the value of democratic equality really being recognized? Is it really possible in a society with extreme inequality? So it's very simple for me to say, everybody counts for one, nobody counts for more than one. Well, it turns out Mr. Musk and his billions count for far more than me and my hundreds, right? In the political arena, and that's not a dig at Elon Musk, and it's not self-deprecating humor. That's just a fact. In our political system, everyone doesn't just count for one. We do in this at the ballot box, but not in political influence. The response to this objection is usually, once again, to recognize those are real problems. We don't just want to say democracy is good because it's fair, otherwise we flip a coin. And you also want to acknowledge, yeah, in a society with deep systemic inequality, everyone doesn't really count for one. Some of us count for more. They would stress the importance of education, particularly civic and political education, so that there's at least some sort of epistemic equality when people are heading into the ballot box, and stressing the importance of regulated, free, and fair elections, where we do the very best we can to make it so that everyone counts for one and no one counts for more than one. So it's an ideal that we aspire to, even if we admit we may not ever fully get there. Maybe we'll talk about this in Q&A. I won't say too much about it now because I'm already going on too long. With the advent of smartphones, some theorists, some political philosophers have advocated for what they call teledemocracy. That one of the reasons, not the only, but one of the reasons the United States ended up as a democratic republic, where we elect representatives and they go to Washington and they have sessions, was that it was impractical otherwise. And especially as the nation grew, I have a full-time job. I try to pay attention to politics. I try to be engaged. I can't be thinking about tax codes and Medicare and Social Security, let alone how to sort out all the foreign conflicts we're in. So we outsource this to other people. Also, I need to be in New Hampshire. I can't be down in DC. But what if there was a system where every time there was something that needed to be voted on, and it fundamentally affected the people, I could, right there in New Hampshire, on my couch, pull out my phone, you know, from 8 to 9 p.m., the referendum is open, and you go in and you vote. And so what they call teledemocracy, using smartphones and the internet to move from more of a republic back to a direct democracy, they think this would actually restore a lot of democratic power to citizens. There's all kinds of potential problems with the system, but I thought it would be fun to know that there are some people who think that leveraging this technology, rather than seeing technology as something that's taking us away from democracy, which is what the conversation usually is, there may be ways to use the technology to get us back towards a democracy. All right, the instrumental arguments. And again, the instrumental value here would be saying, in and of itself, democracy is neither good nor bad, but democracy does something that's good. By implementing this system, it gets us to something that's valuable. First instrumental argument, it's good at solving problems. That democracy is good at solving problems. The cliche for this is that there is wisdom in crowds. So democracy, you get a whole bunch of people together, you crowdsource a question, look for some information, and it gives you a pretty good answer. I don't know if Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is still on, but for people, oh, it is okay. Well, for people who know what it is, you had those 3 lifelines, and one of them was always poll the audience, right? We have random people, presumably, who were just selected randomly and you asked them. 85% of the time, the audience got it right. So a random collection of people in a Hollywood studio with some random trivia question, and when you poll the audience, they get it right 85% of the time. If the person there trusts that democratic process and believes it. I think Yelp is actually a really good example of crowdsourcing being a good way of solving problems. Every once in a while, I've looked up a place and great Yelp reviews 4.7 or whatever, and I go and it's a dud, but that's very rare. I'm actually shocked by how reliable the ratings on Yelp are, or hotels.com or whatever it is. I don't know why I pulled up Salerno's Pizza, I have nothing against them, but the fact that they have 3 stars and only 8 reviews, I would put money on the fact it's not a great place. And it's not great pizza. And it's amazing to me that just crowdsourcing this information, going to the masses, turns out to give you the right answer most of the time. There's a slightly more mathematical way to look at this that I'm going to present, while admitting that I don't fully understand it, particularly the math. Condorcet was a French Enlightenment polymath, brilliant philosopher, and he came up with something called the jury theorem. And here's how it goes. If the average person is more likely to be right than wrong, then the majority opinion of society is more likely to be right than wrong. And Condorcet was a brilliant mathematician, and he worked it out. This is the only equation I'm giving you. That if the average person is right 55% of the time, and if you poll at least 399 people, you have a 98% chance of coming up with the right answer. So, it's not that democracy always gives us the right decision. I'm sure we could go on and on and on about all the times democracy has not given us the right decision, but proponents would say it's the best chance at getting the right decision. All right, second instrumental argument, it's similar to the realizing our nature argument, but it's instrumental, it's not intrinsic. This argument says that having a democratic system, having people participate in a democratic system, habituates certain virtuous traits. We become more thoughtful, patient, empathetic, collaborative, creative, informed, etc., etc., etc. Here's how Adam Swift puts it. For some theorists, what's good about people making political decisions for themselves is not so much that they will make good decisions as that they're making the decisions will make them better people. So this is going to your local city council meeting, participating in the Rotary Club. Again, perhaps what we're doing now. Some fairly easy objections to this one. You might wonder if political engagement makes us better people. What is wrong with the politicians, right? That seems like a very powerful counter-argument. Now that's a little bit of a cheap swipe, right? It's very easy for me to sit here and talk about the fat cats in Washington. And yet, I think there's something to it. If we were gonna run a contest on people who are venal, corrupt, and greedy, I think politicians score better than school teachers, for example. Another concern people have with this is that this value is what philosophers call self-effacing. If this is the value you're trying to achieve, you actually have to kind of pretend it doesn't exist and you can't aim at it. That if you go into democratic engagement or democratic processes saying, I'm just doing this to make myself a better person, well, that's a sign you're probably not a very good person. So there's a lot more to be said about that, but some people worry about values that are self-effacing, values that you have to almost consciously pretend you're not pursuing in order to get that value. Another weird thing about this one is that political positions are irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. If it's just political engagement, going to those town meetings, going to the Rotary Club, writing a letter to the editor, if it's just, well, it just cultivates these great traits, it's weird that the political position you take doesn't matter at all. All right, and finally, this is the final instrumental argument that I wanted to present, is that democracy has perceived legitimacy. And the legitimacy comes from the procedure, not the outcome. I don't think there's anyone who thinks that democracy always gets things right, or that it's always fair, or that it's always just. But we tend, even when we hate the outcome, we tend to think the procedure is legitimate. So that even when we get bad decisions, people say, yeah, but you gotta trust the process, and the process will correct itself. In this way, it's similar to the justice system. I was in, elementary or middle school when the O.J. Simpson saga was playing out, and I actually remember running home from the bus to watch the television coverage of that because it was riveting. And when the verdict finally came out, I actually remember the legal talking heads that they got on TV saying things like this, that a lot of people said, look, it seems like it was the wrong outcome and that there was overwhelming evidence of guilt. And yet, it was the right outcome in that the justice system did what it was supposed to do, and the LAPD screwed up, and the prosecutor screwed up, and so whether or not we think this person was guilty of this crime, it's the process, it's the procedure, it's the system we have to respect, and so, maybe we should feel good that the system worked. As Swift put it, it matters not only what decisions are made, but what people think of those decisions, and rightly or wrongly, when decisions are made democratically, people perceive them as legitimate. So, just to recap, value of democracy: 3 intrinsic: autonomy, self-realization, and equality. 3 instrumental: good decisions, personal development, and perceived legitimacy. Thank you very much. I have no reason to believe that meerkats are democratic in any way. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. And I think we have time for some conversation now.
It's working.
All right. If you want to ask a question, we'll give them all this discussion time too before we evaluate them. If this doesn't go well, then we can knock flat. I'll be right there. Let me catch him first.
Thank you. So, an overarching idea is that if people make good decisions, it means that they're well informed and that they're going to follow the Enlightenment ideal of somebody that's going to make good decisions based on the right information. It seems to me that this ignores work people like George Lakoff that talk about mean thinking and people being gravitating towards, for example, the stern father figure versus the nurturing parents. So there's that whole ideological bias in either direction. And then it also seems to ignore the fact that the information that we're getting is often not objective. I just wondered what you thought about that.
I completely agree and sympathize with what you're saying. This is one of the reasons why I think it's so important to talk about and try to reify whatever the arguments for democracy are, because it's not just crazy totalitarian dictators who think that there's some problems with democracy and it maybe doesn't work as well as we think it does. Serious, virtuous, good-hearted, civic-minded people have for a very long time pointed out that there's some real flaws with democracy. To your point about knowledge, yeah, so even if we're making our best efforts to be informed, then we have to question the trustworthiness of where we're getting our information. We have to think about our own biases. We have to think about the fact that we are swayed by passions at least as often as we are by reason, contrary to what the Enlightenment thinkers would have wanted us to believe. So if we then come to recognize that about ourselves, why would we want to put ourselves in charge of making very, very important decisions? This reminds me of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which you might know of and some people might have heard of. It's a psychological phenomenon where the more you actually know about something, the less willing you are to make authoritative statements about it, which is why, look, I have, to the extent that I have expertise, it's in a very, very, very tiny area of moral philosophy, and if you ask me a question about that, I'm going to go, well, that's complicated, and I give you a very long-winded, non-committal answer. You ask me something about, I don't know, what do I know? Nothing about. The political situation in Tibet, bam, I'm going to fire off some hot take and tell you exactly what should happen. So not only, are we not as rational and reasonable as we might like to think, it turns out the things we do know about, we tend to be very gun shy, and the things we know almost nothing about, we will, get our torches and pitchforks out and head to the town hall. So I agree, and I share those concerns, which is why I find it encouraging that there are so many political philosophers really looking at what the important arguments and the values of democracy are, because it's not something that can just be taken for granted.
So, looking at the objections to democracy and the different value sets, one of the things I was thinking of throughout the presentation was something on an Malcolm Gladwell podcast from a few years ago, which is just the idea that in a representative democracy, if you have a high enough sample size, you just choose random people instead of directly choosing, voting on our representatives. You often end up with the outcomes that people actually want, and also bring people to the table who aren't politicians, who don't campaign. So it seems like some of those objections about equality, like who's represented, money involved in politics, that self-effacing idea where when you want to be a politician and you want to do good and you say that, it probably means you're not a very good person. The only, value set that it seems like it could go against in this framework would be legitimacy, and I'm wondering if you can kind of speak to that idea instead.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great point. This is an empirical question. It's something I assume that there are good political scientists who use the methods of social science and empirical research are looking into this. Would our decisions be just as good, or perhaps even better, if we just randomly selected 2 people over the age of 35 from New Hampshire to go represent us in the Senate than if we go through these elections every 6 years? And it's a great empirical question. I suspect, I'm just giving a hunch here, I suspect things would be no worse. I don't know if that would be better, but we have to run the experiment and see. It's sort of more on the policy end and in the departments of state that I really worry about lack of expertise and wanting expertise. So, and I think many people of both parties feel this way, or should feel this way, that you don't want the politicization of, say, the IRS or of Social Security or of healthcare. Whoever's in charge of the things, it really shouldn't be the politicians. It should be people who are truly experts. Going back to Socrates' ship example, no, we're not taking a vote on who's captaining the ship. We're not taking a vote on who's flying the plane. Nor do I just want to select 2 random people from New Hampshire, send them down to Logan Airport, and hope that they end up being pilots. But in the democratic political arena, I think it's an interesting hypothesis. I don't know much more about it than that, but I would, if you look, I suspect there are political scientists who are doing studies or have done studies on this. To your point about the perceived legitimacy, yeah, that's a tricky one. Would people see that as legitimate? There's something about an election process, about campaigning, having to give a stump speech, having to have your entire social media history combed through by Fox and CNN. I'm not saying I think that's a good thing, but if you can come out of that, well, I don't know. I was gonna say if you can come out of that unscathed, but it turns out you don't have to come out of it unscathed anymore. You can find absolutely anything and it doesn't stop you. But there is still perceived legitimacy. You've gone through the crucible, right? You were forged in fire, they threw everything they had at you, and people still perceive you as legitimate. I've never worked in politics, but I've worked for a number of institutions, some of them very large institutions, and even when there's, when there are people in positions of power, yeah, they need to be competent, but competence doesn't always save them. They have to be both perceived as competent and then perceived as legitimate. So, yeah, I don't know if just, you'd have to convince the citizenry that selecting 100 random people to be our senators would be just as good. It would certainly save money, though. Yeah.
It strikes me that the merits or demerits of democracy are only valid in comparison to the alternative choices that we have. And the question that I have is, if we don't have a democracy, if we don't have a vote and a choice of the people, how then do we decide who is going to lead us?
Yeah.
And secondly, if we make the wrong choice, or if the wrong choice is made, we have somebody that is absolutely horrible, how do we protect ourselves from it, other than through acts of violence?
Thank you very much. Really excellent point. This is in some ways Churchill's aphorism that democracy is the worst form of government, except for every other form of government. What I can tell you is so the people who, again, I'm not talking about vicious, mendacious loons on YouTube. The serious, decent, good-hearted people who think that democracy is not the right political structure, some of them favor something more like a corporate model. That they think for a corporation to run well, unless it's a food co-op in Cambridge, Mass, you don't get all the employees together and have them decide on everything. There's a board of trustees, and there's a C-suite, and and if there's a bad CEO and the company's doing poorly, that CEO gets booted, and you bring in someone new. But they would say something like a corporate model, that most successful American corporations would not be the successful American corporations that they are if they were run democratically. And so they say, I wonder what would happen to our country if we ran it more like a corporation. I'm not advocating that model, but that's one suggestion that's made. Other contemporary political theorists do think that some sort of limited or constitutional monarchy, slightly stronger than what the British have, might be a better way to go. But I think most people would agree with, the sentiment you were expressing, that at the end of the day, we can complain and moan about democracy all we want, but it really does seem better than the available alternatives, particularly when you look at the history of the 20th century, and there were a lot of alternatives that were tried around the world. And democracy, with all of its warts in America, looks pretty good compared to those alternatives. Yeah.
You began your talk with the image of January 6th. And the man who fomented that horror is now holds all the levers of power again. And I remember when I studied philosophy back in college, and I remember reading Descartes, and he talked about an evil genius. And I think what we have right now is an evil genius holding the levers of power. And the people democratically, after January 6th, had a chance to get rid of him once and for all. They impeached him, and they could have said, convicted him, and he would have been gone. You never can run again. And they didn't. Somehow they were afraid of him. And what happens now when we have this horrible person who is now almost trying to inoculate the country by putting soldiers in the Capitol in Los Angeles and doing things, and seemingly with incredible energy. I can't believe the kind of energy that he has. And with no boundaries. And when you see how he doesn't have any interest in democracy at all, when a guy like Putin, that is what he wants to do. Now, it's so dangerous. Yes, the values of democracy, yes, it is the worst form of government, except for all the others. But now we have someone in the presidency who has no interest in democracy. None at all. Now, I think we're in and the people around him have no interest in democracy. That's what really frightens me. And this is what is our greatest challenge of this nation right now.
Thank you for your comment. I am not very good at predicting the future, so I'm not going to make any attempt at prognostication or where things are going. Something that it might be helpful to note is that sometimes democracy gets used as a synonym for certain political values or beliefs or even practices. And fundamentally, democracy is a decision procedure. So, if you ask people, is the Second Amendment, is the right to bear arms democratic or not democratic? It's a trick question. It's neither democratic nor undemocratic. Democracy is a decision procedure. It's about how the method we use to arrive at both the leaders and then the policies. I share some of your concerns about anti-democratic trends in the United States. Going back to where I started, it might be completely cynical, but I don't think it's unimportant that both sides in every political dispute in America right now claim that they are doing it to save democracy and to preserve democracy, or even that they'll destroy certain democratic procedures in order to save democracy. And in giving these talks, I just made it a rule that I will try to avoid overtly partisan discourse. I don't think that habit is exclusive to one political party. I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but there's a nasty habit of people in power thinking that they can subvert democratic means to save democracy, and everyone should be on guard against it. I do think the current president tweeted or X'd or whatever it is not long ago a riff on Napoleon, something like, "He who saves his country breaks no laws." Who knows what he exactly meant by that, or if he knew what he was saying, but yeah, I find that a terrifying sentiment. If I have hope or optimism, it's our judiciary. I think the framers of the American political system were political geniuses. I don't think they were perfect. I don't think they ever claimed to be perfect, but they were political geniuses. It's held for a very, very long time. People have been betting against America for 250 odd years, and they've been wrong, politically, economically, and we're I think we're remarkably good at self-correcting. I seem to be going back to Churchill rather often, but Churchill, in reference to World War II, like to say, Americans will always do the right thing after they've tried everything else. Right, so, we'll see. We'll see.
All right, we have one more.
So, when you were talking about epistocracy, which basically was ruled by smart people, right?
Those who have the right knowledge, yeah.
Okay, and aristocracy ruled by the better people. And so my question really was, who decides that? Because I just came across recently this term kakistocracy, which is government by the least competent, which I feel is now, being enacted. But basically, like, who in that epistocracy and aristocracy, who decides that?
Yeah.
Because if I'm in charge and I decide who's the smartest, then maybe it would be a kakistocracy.
Yeah, great question. Plato referred to this as the expert problem. Like, fine, we all want an expert to be in charge of telling us what to do, but how do you know who's an expert? And the simple answer is with another expert validates them as an expert. And in some ways, this is how all of academia works. Someone with a PhD told you that you're good enough and gave you a PhD. Well, who made them the expert? Oh, well, someone with a PhD told them, and you get into this silly infinite regress, and sometimes it turns out it doesn't work. I would say in practice, though, it does. I've flown on a lot of planes in my life, and thankfully, they've all stayed in the air when they were supposed to, and then all landed when they were supposed to, and presumably the FAA or some organization has some system of figuring out who has expertise in flying planes and who doesn't, and they get the people who do in those right positions. Now, how would this happen on the political sphere? I'm not totally sure. I think it does happen when you go one level below sort of elected politicians. Well, this is how it used to be or was supposed to be. When you go into the State Department, whoever's on the Iran desk, it's not because they ran a great campaign. Vote for me, I'll make Tehran great again, or something like that. It's because they spoke Farsi, and it's because they had degrees in political science, and because they had lived in that region for 2 decades. And there were other people who also had expertise. I coach high school soccer, and here's a phrase my students like to use: game recognizes game, which, as they explained to me, means like when you know the really good players, like when you're a good player, you can recognize the good players. We can't really explain it to everyone else, but like the good players know who the good players are, and we just want to play together. So, I think that's how expertise works. And if you make a colossal screw up, if you're the person in charge of flying the plane and the plane stops flying, I think you get kicked out of the expert club. I guess the problem most people have with that epistocracy model is the perceived legitimacy, and it lends itself to corruption. In some ways, this is the political structure favored by Vladimir Lenin. This is Leninism. You have a very small party. You have a cadre. We're doing it for the people, right? Let's take them at their word. We actually want international peace and goodwill to men and bread, peace, and land and all of that. But most people are stupid, and we're not going to give them. Just let the party. This was the essence of Bolshevism. And I think George Orwell does a pretty good job in Animal Farm of showing there's something there. And if you have decent people who are willing to stick to it, maybe it can work. But the tendency to corruption is overwhelming. So this goes back to that idea that, yeah, democracy is clunky and it's ugly and it's awkward, and wouldn't it be great if we just had a good-hearted, beneficent monarch who ruled by decree and would cut through all the red tape? But the dangers there are overwhelming.
There is a paradox about democracy that involves anti-democratic forces, and I don't know where I'm going with this. Hitler was elected, right? And so there are people that are profoundly anti-democratic and opposed to any sort of open society who will use the tools of open societies and democracy in order to attain power and then shut down those speeches. I wonder if you have any comment on it. I've heard that the paradox can be resolved if you think of democracy as a social compact. And therefore, if somebody is profoundly interested in anti-democratic rule, then they have violated the compact and therefore cannot be It can't legitimately run. I just wonder if you had a better way of resolving that.
Democracy can be subverted democratically. No question about that, and it historically has in different places been subverted democratically. I don't know that there's some ultimate safeguard or ultimate way to avoid that paradox. Constitutionalism is the attempt most people have made that, you have a document, it's whatever else we vote on, you have bills of rights, you have amendments, whatever else we're deciding democratically, certain things are off the table. Term limits for presidents, right? We don't. Though you build in a system where, well, you can pass it, you can revoke an amendment or pass another amendment, and you need 2/3 of Congress and all of this. So constitutions are a pretty good way of safeguarding that. But ultimately, it comes down to the will of the people. I don't know how many constitutions France has been through since it became a republic. 6, I think. Oh, 4? I think there's 6th republic. See, wisdom of crowds. There we go. I said 6, you said 4. Well, right. Well, just let's settle on 5. I mean, my point there is even that's not a guarantee. So I don't think there is a guarantee. I think a virtuous republic depends on virtuous citizens. You lose virtuous citizens, you lose the republic. So the Enlightenment thinkers who were concerned with this, they were worried about how you square that circle. You only get a virtuous republic if you have virtuous citizens. Well, you don't get virtuous citizens without the virtuous republic, and we just go round and round. The way they try to square that circle is education. Education. This is why Rousseau was so concerned with education, particularly what we do with children, and how we educate, bring up, enlighten children. Yeah.
One last thing. I'm curious how important you think, I know you will find this term familiar, how important the cultivation of the beginner's mind is in a virtuous republic. You seem like someone who would value that. The beginner's mind is, for those who don't know, is remembering that you're not the expert even when you're an expert. And it's a hard thing to do. And it seems to be really the problem with politicians and, with, any sort of system. The Athenian system was like juries. It wasn't, every single citizen gets, comes to the town hall. It was, by lottery. So, that is the system they had, and that is the system that, executed Socrates. And so I'm just wondering, you're obviously someone who values that. I'm wondering how important do you think that is?
Thanks. That's actually not a term I'd heard before. So it's beginner's mind. I think I understand what it is, but that's, thanks for sharing that term. Of paramount importance. I think epistemic humility, just frequently saying to yourself, how do I know? Am I sure? Maybe I should thinking it is of paramount importance. What can you do to cultivate that? Never be or never think that you're the smartest person in the room. And if you find yourself in that situation, find some smarter people to hang out with. That seriously. Find people who disagree with you. Not nasty trolls on TikTok or whatever, but again, civic-minded, decent people who have entrenched vehement disagreements and have those awkward conversations. It's so comforting to slink back into our ideological and ethical and moral silos. Beginner's mind, that's what you said. I mean, sit down with an educated, intelligent, decent person who vehemently disagrees with you on a whole bunch of fundamental issues. That'll force you back to the beginning, because you'll have to think, how would I ever make this case or explain this to someone who doesn't already agree with me? I don't know how it is for you. I spend a lot of my time with people who already agree with me about sort of everything, so I never even have to think about what the case is for these things. And then the last thing I would say is do things you're not good at. It keeps you humble, and I think it does. I think it can be parlayed into the political sphere. Some sport you're terrible at, play it. Pick up a new instrument that someone else is a virtuoso and it looks so easy for them, and it's an enormous struggle for you. When you get to a certain age or stage in life and you've built some expertise or you have certain professional accomplishments, when you stay there, I think it does tend towards hubris. I did this with rock climbing some years ago. I thought I was a pretty athletic guy, pretty nimble, and ended up getting into rock climbing, and it was, well, first it was humiliating, how bad I was, but there was this weird benefit to it. It really kept me humble, and then just made me practice going back to things I wasn't very good at. But, well, thanks very much.
Well, thank you all for coming today. Thank you very much, Josh. Our service next week, our last service, our last Saturday, our last summer service, will be, here's her name. Julia Byers. And Julia is doing a program on the role of creative expression to enhance resilience and humanitarian work during uncertain times. So if you want to find out more information about what her program is, she does art therapy. So I think that sort of points you in the direction of what her program would be, and I hope everyone will come. One important thing to remember about today, this was funded by Humanities to Go, and that program requires that you fill out an evaluation sheet for them. I would encourage you, I know they were handing them out, if you have one in your hand, that you fill that out and just set it next to the crayons in the back or on the little table outside, and then and we'll collect them. If you don't have one, they're right outside the door. So I would encourage you to do that.
Are there pencils?
They're crayons. No, I'm presuming there are pencils. Yes, there are, yes. Hive mind again. Everybody knows something we need. Okay. So as we extinguish the chalice, we have basked in the warmth and beauty of this flame and this community. As the chalice flame is extinguished, let us carry its glow within. Let us kindle new sparks within these walls and beyond.